Tonight, let us go somewhere far away. Let us go somewhere the ocean is so wide and so deep that the horizon bends in every direction, unbroken, and the only sound is the long, slow exhale of water against wood. Imagine yourself aboard a vessel made of lashed timber and woven fiber, its twin hulls rocking gently, gently, as a warm wind fills the crabclaw sail overhead. There is no engine. There is no compass. There is no clock ticking in a brass case, no chart spread out on a table, no radio crackling with a distant voice. There is only the stars, the current, and the ancient memory of those who came before, passed down in song, in chant, in the quiet repetition of a grandmother's voice telling a child which way the swells move when the season turns. This is Polynesia. This is the story of the longest, slowest, most patient voyages human beings have ever undertaken, spread across thousands of years and thousands of miles of open Pacific, and yet carried out with a stillness, a calm, a trust in the world's rhythms that we have almost entirely forgotten. So settle in. Let the water hold you. Let the stars come out, one by one, and let us drift. Long before any European ship crossed an ocean, long before the compass was even imagined, the people of the Pacific were already moving. They were moving slowly, deliberately, across distances that seem almost impossible when you trace them on a map. From the islands of Southeast Asia, from the warm green coasts where rivers empty into shallow seas and mangroves trail their roots in the brackish water, families began to venture outward, not in a single great expedition, but gradually over generations, the way a vine grows along a wall, reaching, pausing, reaching again. The earliest of these movements began perhaps 4,000 years ago, perhaps longer, in the region we now call the Bismarck Archipelago, those scattered green islands north of Papua New Guinea where the water is warm year-round, and the reefs are thick with fish, and the forests are full of bird song. The people who lived there had already been seafarers for millennia. They knew the water the way a farmer knows the soil. They knew how to read its color and its mood, how to build canoes from breadfruit wood, how to seal the hulls with the sap of particular trees, how to lash an outrigger to one side so that the vessel would not roll in the open swells. And at some point, no one knows exactly when, no one knows exactly why, some of them began to move east. We call these people the Lapita, after a site in New Caledonia where their distinctive pottery was first found. Pottery decorated with intricate stamped patterns, small repeating geometric shapes pressed into the wet clay with a toothed tool, like the marks of a tiny comb dragged across soft earth. These patterns are beautiful in their quietness, their patience. Each pot must have taken hours to decorate, the maker pressing the tool into the clay again and again, turning the vessel slowly in her hands, building up a design that wrapped around the entire surface in bands and spirals and rows of tiny repeating diamonds. The Lapita did not rush. They settled one island group, then another, each move perhaps spanning a generation or two, each new home becoming familiar before the next departure. They carried with them their pots, their pigs, their chickens, their dogs, their cuttings of taro and yam and breadfruit wrapped in damp leaves to keep them alive through the crossing. They carried their gods and their ancestors' names. and they carried their knowledge of the sea, a knowledge so deep, so refined, that it would eventually allow their descendants to find and settle every habitable island in the largest ocean on Earth. Think about that for a moment. Think about the Pacific Ocean. It covers more of the Earth's surface than all the land on every continent combined. It is wider than the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean put together. Its deepest point lies nearly 7 miles below the surface. And yet, somehow, across centuries and centuries of patient voyaging, the Polynesian navigators found every island in it. Every coral atoll, every volcanic peak, every low-lying ribbon of sand and palm, they found them all. Not with instruments, not with charts, but with their bodies, their senses, their memory, and their faith in the patterns of the natural world. It is one of the most extraordinary achievements in all of human history, and it happened so slowly, so quietly, that the rest of the world did not even know it had occurred. The canoes themselves were beautiful things, built with a care and a reverence that made the construction itself a kind of ceremony. The great voyaging canoes of Polynesia, the Hōkūle'a of Hawaii, the Hōkūle'a of the Cook Islands, the Hōkūle'a of Aotearoa, were double-hulled vessels, 2 long carved hulls joined by a platform of lashed beams, with a shelter on the deck and a sail made of woven pandanus leaf. They could carry 30 people, sometimes more, along with water gourds, dried fish, fermented breadfruit paste, live plants wrapped in wet bark cloth, and the small animals that would become the foundation of a new settlement on an unknown shore. The hulls were carved from the trunks of great trees, koa, tamanu, breadfruit shaped with adzes of basalt and coral, smoothed over many days with the rough skin of dried stingray, until the wood was almost soft to the touch. The lashings were made from coconut fiber, braided into sennit cords so strong and flexible that it could hold the hulls together through weeks of open ocean sailing, flexing with the waves rather than fighting them. No nails, no metal, no glue, just fiber and wood, and the patient skill of hands that knew their work the way a musician's hands know the strings of an instrument. Everything about these vessels was designed for endurance. They were not fast. They were not meant to be fast. They were meant to carry their people safely across immense distances, day after day, night after night, through calm and through storm, and to arrive whole. And the navigators who sailed them were trained from childhood. In some island groups, navigation was a hereditary art, passed from father to son or from master to apprentice over years of careful, patient instruction. The training began not on the water but on land, often at night, lying on one's back on the cool sand of the beach and watching the stars wheel overhead. A young navigator would learn the star compass, not a physical object, not a thing you could hold in your hand, but a mental map of the horizon divided into 32 or more points, each one marked by the rising or setting position of a particular star. He would learn that Hōkūle'a, the star we call Arcturus, passes directly overhead when you are at the latitude of Hawaii. He would learn that the Southern Cross dips low toward the horizon in a way that tells you how far south you have traveled. He would learn to read the stars not as fixed points of light, but as a slow, rotating wheel, a great celestial clock whose hands moved with perfect reliability. Night after night, season after season, year after year, asking nothing in return for their constancy. But the stars were only one part of the navigator's knowledge, and not even the most important part. The ocean itself was the deeper text, the longer book, the one that took a lifetime to read. A master navigator could read the swells, the long, deep, slow-moving waves generated by distant weather systems hundreds or thousands of miles away, and distinguish them from the shorter, choppier waves made by local winds. He could feel, through the hull of the canoe, through the soles of his feet and the palms of his hands and the small bones of his inner ear, the way a swell bent and refracted as it passed over a submerged reef or wrapped around a distant island still far below the horizon. He could detect land that was still far beyond the visible reach of the eye, simply by the way the water moved beneath him. This was not magic. This was not instinct. This was not some romantic notion of primitive people living in harmony with nature. This was knowledge earned slowly, refined over lifetimes, tested and retested across the longest ocean crossings on Earth. And it was held not in books, not in instruments, not in any external device, but in the body and the memory of a living person, standing on the deck of a canoe in the middle of the night, feeling the rhythm of the sea. There were other signs, too, quieter signs, more subtle, the kind of thing you would never notice unless someone had taught you what to look for. The navigators watched the clouds. Over an island, especially a high volcanic island, clouds tend to gather and stack in a distinctive way, forming a kind of pillar or cap above the peak that can sometimes be seen from 50 miles away or more, long before the island itself rises above the curve of the Earth. Over a low atoll, the clouds may carry a faint greenish tinge on their undersides, reflected from the shallow turquoise lagoon below, a phenomenon so subtle that only a trained eye would notice it, but unmistakable once you knew what to look for, like recognizing a friend's handwriting from across a room. The navigators watched the birds. Certain species, the golden plover, the bristle-thighed curlew, the white tern, the brown booby, fly out from land each morning to fish in the open sea and return each evening to roost on their nesting islands. By noting the direction of their flight in the late afternoon, watching the dark shapes of their wings against the reddening sky, a navigator could determine where land lay, even if it was still far out of sight. They watched the patterns of drifting debris, floating seeds, broken branches, clumps of seaweed torn loose by storms, each type associated with a particular island group or current. They watched the phosphorescence in the water at night, the faint greenish glow of disturbed plankton in the wake of the canoe, which sometimes revealed the shape of underwater reefs and shallows. Every element of the natural world was a signal, a whisper, a quiet clue laid out by the ocean itself for anyone patient enough, still enough, attentive enough to learn how to listen. And so the voyages unfolded. Slowly, over centuries. The Lapita people moved eastward through Melanesia, the Solomons, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Fiji, arriving in what are now Tonga and Samoa somewhere around 1,000 years before the Common Era. And there, in those warm and generous islands where the breadfruit grew thick, and the lagoons teemed with fish, and the trade winds blew steady and predictable through the long summer months, they paused. For nearly 1,000 years, the great voyaging slowed, and a new culture took shape, what we now recognize as distinctly Polynesian. The pottery-making tradition of the Lapita gradually faded, as though the people no longer needed to carry that particular art with them into the future. The language shifted and diversified, branching into the many related tongues that would eventually become Hawaiian and Maori and Samoan and Tongan and Tahitian and Marquesan. The social structures grew more elaborate, with chiefly hierarchies and ceremonial traditions and complex systems of kinship and obligation that would come to define Polynesian life across the entire ocean. And the canoe building continued, refined, perfected, passed from master to apprentice in the shade of the boatyards, as though the people were quietly preparing for the next great wave of voyaging that was still to come. It is worth pausing here, in this long stillness between movements, to think about what daily life was like in these islands during those centuries of quiet. Imagine a village on the coast of Sāmoa, perhaps 1,500 years ago. The houses are open-sided, with high thatched roofs shaped like the inverted hull of a canoe, supported by wooden posts carved with simple geometric designs, and the floors are covered with smooth coral pebbles and fine woven mats that feel cool against the skin. Families live together in extended groups, 3 or 4 generations sharing the same compound, and the rhythms of the day are shaped not by clocks or bells, but by the tides and the sun. In the early morning, before the heat rises, the men go out to fish, some in small outrigger canoes on the reef, paddling quietly over the coral gardens where parrotfish and wrasse dart between the branches of staghorn coral, some wading in the shallows with circular nets, casting them in graceful arcs that spread and fall like opening flowers, some diving for octopus among the coral heads, reaching into crevices with practiced hands. The women tend the gardens, plots of taro growing in muddy terraces fed by small streams that come down from the green hillsides, rows of yam and sweet potato on the sloping ground above the village, groves of breadfruit and coconut palm that provide food, fiber, timber, oil, and shade in seemingly endless abundance. Children play on the beach or help with small tasks, weaving palm fronds into baskets and fans, scraping the white meat of coconut into bowls for pressing into cream, chasing the pigs and chickens that wander freely through the village. There is a gentleness to the pace of it all, a rhythm that has nothing hurried or anxious about it. The work is hard, but it is steady, and it is shared, and there is always time to rest in the heat of the afternoon, to sit in the shade of the great breadfruit tree at the center of the village, and watch the light move across the lagoon, the water changing color from pale green to deep turquoise to the milky white of the shallows where the sand is fine as flour. The dogs sleep in the shade. A grandmother sits on a mat, her fingers working steadily at a piece of bark cloth, beating it with a wooden mallet in a slow, rhythmic pattern, thud, 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 that carries across the village like a heartbeat. Somewhere a baby is sleeping. Somewhere someone is singing. The world is small and complete and unhurried, and the ocean is always there, murmuring at the edge of everything, reminding everyone of where they came from and where, someday, someone among them might go. In the evening, when the heat of the day has broken and the light turns golden and then amber, and then the deep blue of early dusk. Food is cooked in an earth oven. A pit dug in the ground and lined with hot stones heated in a fire of coconut husk. The food wrapped carefully in layers of banana leaves and taro leaves and buried to steam slowly for hours, filling the village with a rich, sweet, smoky fragrance that drifts through the palm trees and out over the lagoon. Families gather on the mats. The food is unwrapped and shared, fish and taro and breadfruit and coconut cream, simple and plentiful and warm. And at night, when the fire has burned low and the stars have come out, and the sound of the reef is a constant soft murmur in the darkness, the elders tell stories. They tell the old stories, the ones that carry the names and deeds of the ancestors, the ones that explain why the stars move the way they do and why the seasons change and why the tides rise and fall, the ones that describe the journeys of the gods across the sea, Maui, who fished up islands from the ocean floor with his enchanted hook, Tangaroa, who ruled the deep waters and the creatures within them, Tane, who separated earth from sky and let the light come in. These stories were not just entertainment. They were not just tales told to amuse children on warm evenings. They were navigation. They were history. They were law. They were science. In a culture without writing, the oral tradition was everything, the vessel that carried all knowledge forward through time, as surely as the canoe carried the people forward through space. A master navigator's training might include memorizing hundreds of star positions, dozens of current patterns, the genealogies of chiefly lines stretching back 20 or 30 generations, and the sailing directions to islands he had never visited, but that his teacher's teacher's teacher had found and named and described in such precise detail that the words themselves became a kind of map. These directions were often encoded in chant, rhythmic, repetitive, designed to be remembered exactly, word for word, syllable for syllable, across lifetimes. The chants described the sequence of stars to steer by, the way the swells would change as you approached a particular island, the signs of birds and clouds and currents that would tell you when to turn. They were maps made of language, maps made of breath and memory and the human voice, carried not in a chart case but in the mind of a living navigator, sung softly under the stars as the canoe moved through the dark water, mile after mile after mile. And then, after that long pause in Western Polynesia, the voyaging began again. Sometime around the first few centuries of the Common Era, the dates are still debated, still uncertain, still emerging from the patient work of archaeologists sifting through layers of sand and ash and shell on remote beaches. The great canoes set out once more, this time into the vast, empty, dazzling heart of the Pacific. East. Always east. Into the rising sun, into the unknown, into water that no human being had ever crossed before. To the Marquesas, those steep volcanic islands rising like dark cathedrals from the deep sea, their cliffs draped in green and their valleys thick with jungle. To the Tuamatis, that great arc of low coral atolls stretching across 1,000 miles of ocean like a scattered necklace of turquoise and white, so low in the water that you could miss them entirely if you were not watching for the faint green shimmer on the clouds above. To the Society Islands, Tahiti, Bora Bora, Raiatea, Huahine, with their dramatic volcanic peaks and wide lagoons, and the sound of waterfalls falling into deep green pools. And from there, in 3 extraordinary radiations outward from this central hub, to the most remote corners of the Polynesian Triangle, north to Hawaii, east to Rapa Nui, and southwest, far southwest to Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. Each of these journeys was immense. Hawaii lies more than 2,000 miles north of Tahiti, across open ocean, with no intervening land, no stepping stone, no place to rest or resupply. Rapa Nui, Easter Island, sits alone in the southeastern Pacific, more than 1,000 miles from the nearest inhabited island, the most isolated settlement on Earth, a small volcanic triangle in a wilderness of water. Aotearoa, New Zealand, was the last major landmass on the planet to be reached by human beings, found by Polynesian voyagers who sailed into colder, rougher, stormier, more unfamiliar waters than any their ancestors had known, leaving behind the warm tropics and entering a world of rain and mist and forests of strange trees that shed their bark instead of their leaves. And yet they found them all. They found them and they settled them and they built new lives there, adapting their tropical crops and customs to new climates, new soils, new landscapes, new possibilities. Think about the courage that required, not the loud, dramatic courage of a soldier charging into battle, but the quiet, sustained courage of a family climbing into a canoe and sailing away from everything they have ever known, toward a place that exists only as a hope, a possibility, a faint suggestion in the movement of the water and the flight of the birds. Think about the mothers holding their children as the canoe rose and fell on the open swells, day after day, night after night. Think about the navigator standing alone at the bow in the small hours of the morning, reading the stars, reading the waves, carrying in his mind the lives of everyone aboard. Think about what it means to trust that deeply, to trust the ocean, to trust the knowledge of your ancestors, to trust the stars to guide you to a place you have never seen. There is something profoundly moving about that trust, something that speaks to the deepest and most enduring qualities of the human spirit. The sweet potato, which the Polynesians somehow acquired from the coast of South America, the details of that exchange are still one of the great unsolved mysteries of Pacific history, a quiet enigma that scholars have debated for decades, proved able to grow in the cooler soils of Aotearoa. The kumara, as the Maori called it, became a staple, stored in underground pits lined with sand and gravel to protect it from the winter cold. And so a people born of the tropics, a people whose ancestors had lived for thousands of years in the warm waters between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, made their home at the edge of the temperate world, and the stars above them were different, and the seasons were reversed, and the forests were full of birds they had never seen or imagined, great flightless moa, standing taller than a man, moving slowly through the ancient fern and podocarp woodlands like gentle ghosts. But let us return to the canoe. Let us return to the middle of the ocean, to the quiet heart of a voyage, far from any land, where the days blend together and the world shrinks to the wooden deck beneath your feet, the wide curving sky above, and the endless moving surface of the water in every direction. What was it like to be at sea for weeks at a time, out of sight of land, with nothing but the waves and the wind and the stars and the slow passage of the sun from east to west? The accounts that survive, the oral traditions preserved by the navigators' descendants, the observations of early European visitors who were astonished by what they saw, the experiences of modern navigators who have revived the old arts, suggest a rhythm of extraordinary calm. The navigator did not sleep in the way we understand sleep. He rested in short intervals throughout the day and night, lying on the deck with one hand trailing in the water, feeling the movement of the swells even as he dozed. His body attuned to the ocean's rhythm the way a mother is attuned to the breathing of a sleeping child. He woke often to check the stars, to note the direction of the wind, to scan the horizon for the faintest change in the color of the sky or the shape of the clouds. The other crew members took turns at the steering paddle, at bailing water from the hulls with coconut shell bailers, at adjusting the sheets of the sail as the wind shifted. Food was eaten cold, dried fish, fermented breadfruit paste wrapped in leaves, coconut meat, sometimes raw fish caught trailing a line from the stern, or cooked over small fires built on a bed of sand in a wooden box on the deck, carefully tended to keep the flames low and the embers from scattering in the wind. Water was carried in sealed gourds and rationed carefully, supplemented by rain caught in the folds of the sail during passing showers, the fresh water running down the woven fibers and collected in containers below. It was a life of minimal exertion and maximum attention, a life in which doing less was more important than doing more, in which stillness and watchfulness were the highest virtues, and in which the greatest danger was not the storm but the loss of concentration, the moment of inattention that could send the canoe drifting off course into the trackless blue. There is a concept in Hawaiian navigation called Hōkūle'a, the art of steering, of guiding, of finding one's way. But the word carries deeper connotations than simple direction finding. To Hōkūle'a is to be in alignment with the world, to be attuned to its patterns, to move with it rather than against it, the way water moves through a channel or wind moves through a valley. The navigator does not conquer the ocean. He does not fight it or overpower it or bend it to his will. He reads it, respects it, yields to its moods, and finds within its vast indifference a path, a quiet, narrow, barely visible path that exists not on any chart but in the relationship between the navigator's knowledge and the ocean's behavior. This is a fundamentally different relationship with the natural world than the one that would later drive European exploration, with its emphasis on instruments, charts, conquest, and control. The Polynesian navigator did not need to dominate the sea. He needed only to understand it. And that understanding came not from technology, but from time, long, slow, patient time spent watching, time spent listening, time spent being still on the surface of the water while the water moved beneath him and the stars moved above him, and the whole world turned in its ancient, unhurried rhythm. And it is this stillness that makes the story of Polynesian voyaging so different from the other great maritime histories of the world. There was no empire behind these voyages. There was no king demanding gold or spices or new territories to tax. There was no merchant class financing expeditions in hopes of profit. There were no flags to plant, no claims to make, no maps to fill in with the names of distant kings. The motivations were quieter, more personal, more deeply human. Some voyages were driven by curiosity, the simple, ancient, irresistible desire to know what lies beyond the horizon, the same impulse that makes a child walk to the end of a path to see what is around the bend. Some were driven by necessity, overcrowding on a small island where the gardens could no longer feed all the families, a drought that withered the taro, a dispute between chiefly families that made it easier and wiser to leave than to stay and fight. Some were driven by the sheer love of voyaging itself, the pride and the spiritual fulfillment that came from mastering the sea, from proving oneself worthy of the ancestors who had made the same crossing generations before, from feeling the salt wind on your face and the deck beneath your feet, and knowing that you were part of something ancient and unbroken and good. And some, perhaps, were driven by nothing more than a feeling, a restlessness, a dream, a story heard in childhood about a distant land where the birds sang differently, and the fruit tasted sweeter and the stars hung lower in the sky. Whatever the reasons, the pattern was remarkably consistent. A group would prepare. They would build or refurbish a canoe, a process that could take months or even years. They would gather provisions, enough dried food and fresh water for a journey that might last weeks, along with the cuttings and seedlings and animals needed to start a new life on an unknown shore. They would consult the navigators and the priests and the chiefs. They would wait for the right season, the right wind, the right alignment of stars. And then, on a chosen night when the conditions were favorable, they would push off from the beach and turn their bow toward the open sea. Behind them, the fires of the village would grow smaller and smaller until they were only faint orange points in the darkness, and then they would vanish entirely, and there would be nothing left but the sound of the water and the creak of the lashings and the whisper of the wind in the sail. Ahead of them, there was nothing but water and sky. And somewhere in that nothing, somewhere far beyond the curve of the world, there was an island waiting for them, an island they had never seen, an island that might not even exist, but an island that the navigator believed in, because the ocean had told him it was there. Let us drift now from the open ocean to the quiet lagoon, from the voyage itself to the arrival, to the moment when a canoe that has been at sea for weeks finally enters the calm water behind a reef and slides gently, gently, onto a white sand beach. Imagine the silence. Imagine the sudden stillness after days and weeks of constant motion, the strange, almost unsettling solidity of land beneath feet that have grown accustomed to the rolling deck, the different quality of the air, no longer pure salt and wind, but something richer, something green, carrying the scent of soil and flowers and the damp breath of the forest. The voyagers would step ashore and perform rituals of arrival, prayers to the gods, offerings of food and kava placed at the edge of the water where the waves could carry them back to the sea, the planting of a sacred stone or post to mark the moment of first contact with the new land, to claim it not through force but through ceremony, through gratitude, through the acknowledgement that this place was a gift from the ocean and the ancestors. Then slowly, carefully, with the patience that had brought them across the water, the work of settlement would begin. Shelters would be built from the materials at hand, fallen branches, palm fronds, strips of bark. Gardens would be cleared, the undergrowth cut away and burned, the ash worked into the soil to enrich it. The cuttings of taro and breadfruit and banana, carefully tended throughout the voyage, watered with precious fresh water and shielded from the salt spray, would be planted in prepared ground. The pigs and chickens would be released to forage. And within a few seasons, a new village would begin to take shape, a village that looked remarkably like the one left behind, because the settlers carried with them not just their crops and animals, but their entire way of life, their architecture, their social structures, their ceremonies, their stories, their understanding of what it meant to be human in a world made mostly of water. This is how Polynesian culture spread across the Pacific, not as a single wave of conquest, not as an army marching across a map, but as a slow, organic replication, like a living thing dividing and growing and adapting, like a coral reef building itself outward one tiny polyp at a time. Each new settlement was a daughter of an older one, carrying the same essential patterns but gradually developing its own variations, its own local traditions, its own particular relationship with the island it had come to call home. The Marquesans carved their tiki figures with wide, staring eyes and elaborate headdresses and bodies covered in intricate tattoo patterns that told the story of their lineage and their deeds. The Tahitians built their mari, stone temple platforms, with careful alignments to the rising and setting points of important stars, creating sacred spaces where the ceremonies of birth and death and the investiture of chiefs connected the human world to the celestial one. The Hawaiians developed a sophisticated system of land management called Ahupua, in which each district ran from the mountaintop to the sea, encompassing every ecological zone: cloud forest, rain-fed farmland, irrigated taro fields, fish ponds, reef, in a single integrated unit that sustained the community through reciprocity between upland and shore. The Rapanui carved their great moai statues, those brooding stone figures gazing inland from the edges of their ceremonial platforms called ahu, their backs to the sea, their enormous faces calm and watchful, as though looking not outward toward future voyages but inward, toward the ancestors and the past and the quiet center of the island itself. And the Maori of Aotearoa adapted to a cooler, wetter, more temperate climate than any Polynesians had known before, developing new forms of architecture. The elaborately carved meeting houses called waranui, their lintels and gable boards covered in flowing curvilinear designs of extraordinary beauty. The fortified hilltop villages called pa with their terraces and palisades, and new traditions of art and oratory that reflected both their Polynesian heritage and the unique, mist-shrouded, forested character of their new home. In all of these places, across all of these islands, the memory of the voyages was kept alive. The canoe remained a sacred object, a symbol not just of the journey that had brought the people to their island, but of the courage and the wisdom and the faith that the journey had required. In many Polynesian cultures, the canoe was also a metaphor for the community itself. The chief was the steersman, the people were the crew, and the island was the vessel that carried them all through time. The great voyaging canoes were sometimes preserved in special shelters, honored with ceremonies, repaired and maintained by dedicated craftsmen, even when they were no longer used for long-distance sailing. And the navigational knowledge, the star paths, the swell patterns, the bird signs, the cloud reading, the whole vast and intricate system of understanding that had made the voyages possible, was kept alive in the chants and the training of specialists, even as the era of long-distance voyaging gradually, slowly, quietly drew to a close. For it did draw to a close. Slowly, gently, without a single dramatic ending, without a final voyage or a last great crossing, the great ocean-spanning journey ceased. By the time European ships arrived in the Pacific, Magellan crossing in the 16th century, Tasman touching Aotearoa in the 17th, Cook mapping and charting in the 18th. The era of Polynesian long-distance voyaging was largely over. The islands had been found. The settlements had been made. The ocean, which had once been a highway connecting distant communities, became a barrier once more, and the individual island groups developed in relative isolation, their connections to one another maintained only by oral tradition, by the shared languages and customs that marked them all as children of the same voyaging ancestors, and by the occasional inter-island voyage between neighbors close enough to see each other's smoke. The great navigational knowledge began to fade, not everywhere, not all at once, not in any sudden catastrophe, but gradually as the need for it diminished and the old masters died without finding apprentices willing to undertake the years and years of training required to learn the full depth of their art. It is a quiet kind of loss, the kind that happens so slowly you do not notice it until it is nearly complete, like the dimming of a candle in a room where no one is watching, or the erosion of a stone that has been lying in a stream for 100 years. One generation knows the star paths and the swell patterns and the bird signs. The next generation knows them less well, has heard the chants but has not memorized them all, has sailed between neighboring islands but has never crossed the open ocean. The generation after that knows only the stories, the legends, the memory that once, long ago, the ancestors could sail by the stars to islands beyond the horizon. And the generation after that has forgotten even the stories, and the knowledge is gone, vanished as completely as a wake behind a canoe, dissolved into the water and the wind. By the 20th century, the ancient practice of non-instrument navigation was nearly extinct, surviving only in a few scattered places, notably in the central Caroline Islands of Micronesia, where a handful of master navigators still knew the old ways and still sailed by the stars, and in the memories of elders across Polynesia who could recite the chants, but could no longer put them into practice upon the open sea. And yet the story does not end there. It does not end in forgetting. In the 1970s, a group of Hawaiians and their allies, sailors, scholars, dreamers, people who refused to let the old knowledge disappear, set out to prove that the ancient voyages were real, that Polynesian navigators truly could have crossed thousands of miles of open ocean without instruments, guided only by traditional knowledge and the deep, patient reading of the natural world. They built a replica double-hulled voyaging canoe, the Hōkūle'a, named for the star Arcturus, the star that passes directly overhead at the latitude of Hawaii, using traditional designs and materials, and they recruited a master navigator from the Caroline Islands, a man named Lapita, one of the last living practitioners of the ancient art of star navigation, to guide them on a voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti. It was a journey of more than 2,000 miles across open ocean, with no instruments, no GPS, no radio, only the stars and the swells and the birds and the clouds, the same signs that had guided the original settlers 1,000 years before. And the voyage succeeded. The Hōkūle'a arrived in Tahiti in 1976, greeted by thousands upon thousands of people gathered on the beach, many of them weeping, and the achievement sparked a renaissance of Polynesian culture and identity that continues to this very day. Young Hawaiians began to learn the old navigation techniques. New voyaging canoes were built in Hawaii, in Aotearoa, in the Cook Islands, in Tahiti, in Samoa. The star paths were remembered. The swell patterns were relearned. The chants were sung again, their words carrying the same knowledge they had carried for centuries, unbroken, alive. Maupiailug, the Micronesian navigator who guided the Hōkūle'a on that first voyage, became a beloved figure in Hawaii, a quiet, gentle man who had spent his life on the water and who carried within him a tradition that stretched back further than anyone could measure. He taught a generation of Hawaiian navigators, sharing freely the knowledge that his own teachers had guarded carefully, because he understood that some things are too important to let die, that some forms of knowledge belong not to a single people or a single island, but to the whole human family. He taught them to feel the swells with their bodies, to read the stars with their minds, to trust the ocean with their hearts. And when he died in 2010, he left behind not only his students but a movement, a quiet, growing, worldwide movement to recover and preserve the ancient arts of wayfinding, to remember what it means to navigate by paying attention to the world rather than to a screen. His legacy lives in every canoe that sails without instruments, in every young navigator who lies on the deck at night and watches the stars turn overhead, in every chant that is sung on the open water in the old way, in the old words, with the old rhythms that have been carried across the Pacific for longer than history itself. And so the voyages continue, in a sense, even now. Not as journeys of settlement. There are no more empty islands to find, no more unknown shores waiting beyond the horizon, but as journeys of memory, of connection, of return. The navigators who sail the Hōkūle'a and her sister canoes today are not looking for new land. They are looking for something older and quieter and more necessary than that. They are looking for the feeling of being at sea under the stars, with no instrument but the human mind, no engine but the wind, no chart but the memory of those who came before. They are looking for that ancient stillness, that deep patience, that willingness to trust the ocean and be guided by its rhythms rather than imposing your own. And when they find it, when they stand on the deck of a canoe in the middle of the Pacific at 3 in the morning, watching Hōkūle'a rise slowly above the northeastern horizon, feeling the long, slow pulse of the southern swell beneath the hull and the warm wind steady on their cheek, they are, for a moment, in the same place their ancestors were, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. The ocean has not changed. The stars have not changed. The wind still fills the sail in the same way. And the quiet, patient, beautiful art of finding one's way across the widest water on Earth is still, after all these years, after all these centuries of forgetting and remembering and forgetting again, alive. Let us rest here now, on this gentle water, in this quiet space between the waves. Let us think, if only for a moment, about what it means to navigate not just across an ocean, but through a life, through a night, through the slow passage of hours before sleep comes. The Polynesian navigators understood something that we, in our world of screens and satellites and instant communication, have largely forgotten, that finding your way is not about speed. It is not about instruments or technology, or the anxious need to know exactly where you are at every moment. It is about attention. It is about stillness. It is about learning to feel the subtle rhythms of the world around you, the way the light changes, the way the air moves, The way time itself seems to slow when you stop trying to control it and trusting those rhythms to guide you where you need to go. The stars move slowly. The swells move slowly. The birds fly out and fly back, day after day in the same patient arcs. And if you are still enough, quiet enough, patient enough, the world will show you the way. So let the canoe rock gently beneath you. Let the sail fill and empty, and fill again with the warm Pacific wind. The stars are overhead, turning their slow wheel, and the ocean stretches out in every direction, dark and calm and immeasurably deep. Somewhere ahead, beyond the curve of the horizon, there is an island. You cannot see it yet, but you know it is there, because the water tells you so, because the birds tell you so, because the clouds, faintly green on their undersides in the last light of evening, tell you so. You do not need to hurry. You do not need to worry. You do not need to do anything at all. The ocean is patient, and the stars are patient, and the island will be there when you arrive. Close your eyes now. Feel the water beneath you, holding you, rocking you, carrying you forward. Listen to the wind in the sail, soft and steady and warm. And let yourself drift, slowly, gently, peacefully, across the widest sea in the world, toward a shore you have never seen but that has been waiting for you, quietly, patiently, for a very long time. Good night.